My name is Michael. I am 78 years old. At this age, there isn't much left to prove. No one left to convince, and not many reasons left to say things that are easy to hear. I spent almost my entire life believing this, that good parents are the ones who step in and carry the weight for their children, the ones who solve problems, the ones who make everything easier for their children, the ones who stand in front always ready to jump in before their child even has the chance to stumble. That belief was praised constantly. People called it sacrifice, responsibility, unconditional love. I heard those words for decades and I never questioned them. But if you asked me now at the end of my life whether that belief was right, my answer would make many people uncomfortable, because I did everything a good father is supposed to do. I stood in the way many times. I fixed my child's mistakes again and again. I chose exhaustion so my child wouldn't have to carry the burden. And it was precisely that choice that created a void I didn't see until much later. Not at the time, not when my child was young, but many years later when I began to realize there were things my child did not have, even though I had given almost everything. I'm not telling this story to deny parental love. I'm telling it because there is a very thin line between being a parent and playing the hero. And I crossed to the wrong side of that line very early, without knowing that I was paying for it a little more each day. I'm not saying this to teach you how to raise children. Honestly, at this age, I no longer believe I'm wise enough to teach anyone. I'm saying it because I've gone too far to turn back, and because when people realize they don't have much time left, they start speaking more truthfully, with less decoration, with less need to protect their image. If I were 40 or 50, I would probably tell this story differently. Softer, easier to hear. I would say things like, everything has its pros and cons. I would say no one is perfect. I would choose words that make people feel comfortable. But not now. Now I look back, and I know this very clearly. Some mistakes don't come from bad intentions. They come from things society praises. And because they're praised, no one warns you to stop. I was praised for being a responsible father, for always being there, for being someone who could handle everything. Yeah, I heard those words and thought I was on the right path. I used them to reassure myself whenever I was tired, whenever I doubted, whenever there was a vague feeling inside me that something wasn't right. But I ignored that feeling, because it had no proof, because no one confirmed it, and because it conflicted with the image of a good father I had grown used to being. I don't have many years ahead of me. I know that very well. And because of that, I no longer have the motivation to say things that sound nice. I have only one motivation left: to speak the truth while it can still be useful to someone else. Not for me, for you. When I was young, that belief sounded perfectly reasonable. I became a father for the first time at 32. I still remember clearly the feeling of holding that baby in my arms, small, fragile, completely dependent. In that moment, a thought rose naturally: I have to protect this child from everything, and the society around me reinforced that thought every day. Good parents don't let their children lack anything. Good parents don't let their children get into trouble. Good parents step in before their children have to face things themselves. I grew up in a generation that believed children were a burden to carry, not human beings to be trained. I was taught that failure was something shameful, that if my child stumbled, it meant I hadn't done enough as a parent. So when my child struggled at school, I intervened. When my child had problems with friends, I made the calls. When my child couldn't do something, I did it for them. Not because I looked down on my child, but because I truly believed I was loving them the right way. I believed that if I did enough, my child would be safe. If I carried enough, my child would be lighter. I believed a father's role was to walk ahead so the child wouldn't have to collide with the sharp edges of life. And at the time, nothing I did looked like a mistake. My child was well-behaved, obedient, free of major trouble. From the outside, everything looked fine, even admirable. I looked at other fathers and thought I was doing better. I was more present, more cautious, faster at solving things. I don't judge my younger self. Truly, I don't. If I went back to that time with what I knew, then I would probably do the same. Because no one ever told me that the line between helping your child and living your child's life for them is much thinner than I imagined. And at that time, I had no idea that I had already started crossing that line very early on. Then I began postponing the most important things in a way that felt very familiar. Not postponing helping my child, but postponing letting my child do things on their own. I always thought later, when the child is a little older, when the child is stronger, when things are less risky. I told myself that now wasn't the time for my child to stumble. Life was long. Walking ahead for a while wouldn't hurt. Just a few more years. When my child was young, I thought they weren't mature enough to decide for themselves. When my child became a teenager, I thought the stage was too sensitive to add pressure. When my child became an adult, I thought the world was too harsh, and I should still be there to absorb the blows. Every stage came with a perfectly reasonable excuse to keep stepping in. I never realized I was repeating the same sentence just with different words. Not yet. Later. Just a few more years. There were evenings when my child sat across from me talking about a very small problem. I didn't ask what they thought. I only asked, "Let Dad take care of it for you." And I did. Immediately. Efficiently. Without letting them sit with discomfort for long. I thought I was saving my child time. I thought I was sparing them pain. But in truth, I was taking away the very moments they needed in order to grow up. Year after year, I was still there. Always ready. Always one step ahead. And because I was always present, my child never had to stand at the front of his own life. I grew accustomed to being the one who fixed things. My child grew accustomed to letting me do it. There was no moment that signaled I should stop. No warning bell. Just time moving forward steadily, smoothly. And it was that smoothness that convinced me everything was fine. Until I began to notice that within that calm, something was slowly disappearing. There is one very ordinary afternoon I still remember clearly. My son was about 16 at the time. He was sitting at the dining table, a white envelope in front of him. On the envelope was the school's logo. I knew immediately what it was. A notice about some mistake, a low grade, a minor violation, or a warning. He held the envelope for a long time without opening it, just turning the corner of the paper between his fingers. I sat across from him. I saw everything, and in my mind I already had a plan. I spoke before he could say anything. "Let me see." He looked up, looked at me, a quick glance. Then he slid the envelope across the table. No argument, no resistance, as if it were already decided. I opened the letter, read it, nodded. In my head, I was already running through the calls I would need to make. Who to talk to, what to say, how to resolve it quickly, cleanly. While I was reading, my son sat still. He didn't ask anything, didn't explain, didn't defend himself. He stared out the window for a long time. I handled everything within 2 days. The school understood. The issue was set aside. There were no serious consequences. I thought I had done well. But there was one very small detail I didn't notice at the time. Throughout that entire process, my son didn't say another word. He didn't ask what I thought. He didn't say how he felt. And I didn't ask either. Much later, many years later, I remembered the look in his eyes as he stared out that window that day. It wasn't fear. It wasn't sadness. It was something like retreat, as if he had taken a step back, making room for me to stand in his place. I won a very small battle, and I lost something I couldn't yet see. There are moments in parenting that are not loud. No tears, no arguments, just a look that goes unnoticed, a very brief chance for a child to stand on their own, and an adult stepping in instead. I did that many times, but that was the first time I saw it most clearly, even though at the time I didn't understand what I was seeing. Now, looking back from where I am today, I can see very clearly what I achieved and what I took away. My child grew up safe, with fewer collisions, fewer major mistakes, no falls painful enough to shape a lifetime. I used to be proud of that. I thought I had fulfilled my role as a father. I thought I had shielded him well enough. But when my child entered adulthood, there was one thing I could no longer deny. He hesitated over very small choices. Not because he lacked intelligence, but because he had never had to stand alone long enough to hear his own voice. Whenever he faced difficulty, his first instinct wasn't to think, it was to turn toward me. And I was still there, as always. Until one day, I no longer had the strength. I grew older, I slowed down. I could no longer solve everything as quickly as before. And for the first time, my child had to step forward on his own. That moment wasn't beautiful the way I had imagined. He was confused, easily panicked, easily discouraged, not because he was weak, but because he had never been trained to be strong. I had cleared the path too carefully to the point that he didn't know how to walk once the path was no longer cleared. That was when I finally understood there are things that cannot be made up for, cannot be taught again once it's too late, cannot be returned with an apology or an explanation. I can give my child money. I can give advice, but I cannot give back the years he should have spent being responsible for himself. And the most painful part is that I didn't lose my child in the usual sense. He's still there. He still calls me. He still needs me. But between us is a strange emptiness. An emptiness made of experiences he never had because I unknowingly took them from him. Some losses don't show themselves right away. They only appear when there's no longer any way to fix them. It took me a very long time to dare to call that loss by its true name. I used to think parenting meant shielding, standing in front, not letting your child pay a price. I believed that if my child didn't hurt, then I had done the right thing. But now looking back, I understand something very different. Being a parent is not about being a hero. A hero always arrives in time. A hero always fixes things. A hero makes everything look fine immediately. Parents are not like that. Parents are the ones who stand close enough so their child doesn't collapse, but far enough that the child must take the step themselves. The ones who don't rush in to take the problem out of their child's hands, even when they know they could solve it faster, cleaner, with less pain. I confused those two roles for many years. I thought I was loving my child, but in truth, I was loving the feeling of being needed. I thought I was protecting my child, but sometimes I was only protecting my own fear. Fear of seeing my child fail, fear of seeing my child hurt, fear of feeling powerless. My old definition of love was, my child must not face hardship. My new definition, realized too late, is my child is allowed to face hardship without being abandoned. Those two are completely different. One creates dependence, the other creates growth. I chose the first for nearly 40 years, not because I didn't love my child enough, but because I loved him in a way that didn't allow him to grow in time. And it wasn't until I no longer had the strength to be a hero that I finally understood. True parenting requires more courage than rushing in to save your child. The courage to stop, the courage to stay silent, the courage to trust that your child can endure what you desperately want to carry for them. If you're listening up to this point, there's a good chance a familiar sentence is forming in your mind. But my child is different. My child is weaker. My child needs me more. I said those things too. Almost word for word. Only the child's name was different. If you're a parent and you're often the one making calls for your child, speaking for them, deciding for them, apologizing for them, cleaning up the consequences for them, then I know exactly what you're thinking. You think that if you don't step in, everything will fall apart. You think your child isn't ready. You think the world out there is too harsh for your child to face alone. And you tell yourself you're only doing this for now. You don't think you're controlling. You think you're protecting. You don't think you're taking anything away. You think you're giving. You might also be telling yourself that your child is grateful, that your child still needs you, that this relationship is very close. And yes, it is close, but sometimes that closeness is built on dependence, not on trust. Have you noticed this? When something happens, does your child look to you before looking inward? When facing difficulty, is your child's first instinct to look for a solution or to look for you? I'm not asking to accuse you. I'm asking because I lived inside those answers for many years without realizing it. I thought I was the support. Only later did I realize I was also the shadow blocking my child's view. You may be telling yourself that you're different from me. I believed that very deeply too. I was certain I would know when to stop. I thought that at some point my child would be strong enough and I would naturally step back. I believed that transition would be clear, that there would be a sign, a moment that said, now it's time. But there was no such moment, because every time I stepped in for my child, things were resolved too smoothly. No major consequences, no frightening fall, no reason to stop. And it was precisely that smoothness that convinced me I was doing the right thing. I used to think I was different from controlling parents. I didn't shout, I didn't impose harshly, I just helped. I just stood nearby. I only stepped in when needed. I comforted myself with that gentleness. But the truth is, control doesn't have to be loud. It only has to be steady enough that your child no longer needs to figure things out alone. I once believed that if something was wrong, my child would resist, would speak up, would push me away. But my child didn't do that. He adapted. He learned to lean on me. And I mistook that adaptation for things being fine. By the time I realized it, the habit was too deep. The roles were too fixed. My child was used to me standing in front. I was used to not stepping aside. There's no gentle way to say this. If you wait until the consequences are obvious, it may already be too late. I waited for a big sign, and what frightened me most was there was no sign at all. Now, having said this much, there's nothing left for me to fix. No beautiful ending. No moment where my child suddenly understands everything. No perfectly timed sentence that makes up for the years. Life doesn't work that way. There are evenings when I sit alone thinking about all the times I stepped forward too quickly. The times I thought I was saving my child, but was actually taking away a very small chance for them to grow on their own. I don't think about what I did wrong in a moral sense. I think about what I did instead of them. Time keeps moving. My child keeps living their life. I'm still their parent. But there are empty spaces that can never be filled again, not because of a lack of love, but because the necessary collisions were pushed aside too early. I spent 40 years playing the hero. And near the end of my life, I finally understood that this role comes with a very quiet cost. I don't know what you'll do with this story. I don't expect you to change immediately. I'm just someone who has nearly reached the end of the road, looking back at my own footprints and seeing clearly where I should have slowed down. So before I fall completely silent, I leave you with one question, not for you to answer to me, but to carry with you into very ordinary decisions. If you keep stepping in for your child the way you are now, then one day, what will your child be missing that you can never give back?